We are delighted to welcome her to this forum, and all the way from the UK. As I said, you can post on the Pigeonhole when you have questions. Anne-Marie Rafferty is a Professor of Nursing Policy, former Dean of the Florence Nightingale Facility of Nursing and Midwifery at King's College in London. She trained as a nurse, clinical researcher, and was the first nurse to gain a doctorate from Oxford University. She is a policy expert on the nursing workforce and was seconded to the Department of Health to work with Lord Aradazi on the nursing contribution to the reform of the National Health Service in 2008. Among other accolades, she was made Commander of the British Empire by Her Majesty the Queen in 2008 for outstanding service to the healthcare industry, and is currently leading the Lancet Commission on Nursing in the UK. Wow. And on top of that, you've got time to come out here and visit us, and we are very honoured. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Rafferty. Okay, you've got the clicker? Yep.
You've got the clicker? Yeah, we're clicking in. Thank you so much, Scott, for those very, very kind words. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. It's brilliant to be in Brisbane, and I really want to thank my host, the Australian College of Nursing, the board, and pay particular tribute to Heidi Sola. I don't know where Heidi is, but she's made such a smooth set of arrangements. So all credit to the Australian College of Nursing, I think, for having this initiatives. I've also thoroughly enjoyed the presentations from Sue and from Francis. I think many of those points you might hear some echoes of in what I'm about to say. So, leveraging leadership and using that as a basis in which to harvest some of the changes that have already been alluded to. I want to thank those to whom I owe a great debt of gratitude, because I'm going to talk about some studies I've had the privilege of being involved with. One is a major European initiative on workforce and the predictors of quality and forecasting the staffing needs to deliver that quality, called RN Forecast. I want to thank also colleagues from the Institute of Medicine, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, because I'm going to draw on some of their evidence from the Future of Nursing initiative in the US as one of my little case studies and cameos of change. And then I want to pay tribute to Professor Glenn Robert from King's, also a colleague of mine, who has about to undertake the 10-year evaluation of the productive ward. So that might be of interest to some of you. We've heard about the words productivity already mentioned today. It's great, I think, to see the fact that we've already heard some of the conditions. What are the conditions that are actually conducive to change, and particularly system change and policy reform, which is a particular interest of mine. And I'm speaking here both as a historian as well as someone interested in policy. I think the two things go hand in glove. You have to understand often the past, where people are coming from psychologically, but also where systems are coming from themselves, and what are the interests that protect a pathway to change or enable it to move into change. I'm going to give you 4 little examples just to kind of get you buzzing about, yes, there are these possibilities, but thinking about where these case studies stand on a broader continuum of change. What helps to make or break? Some of them are successful, some of them are less successful. So that gives us a bit of cogitation material to consider with respect to those conditions. And then think about, what does that tell us about the leveraging of change and system leadership, which we've already heard is something that we all have a responsibility for, and in collective terms is a distributed function throughout the entire system. So where better to start than our wonderful role model of Florence Nightingale? If anyone understood how to make change, it was Florence Nightingale. She used every single fibre of her being in order to leverage that change. She was, of course, born forgive me if I go in my historian's hat, I might be here for 48 hours talking about Nightingale. But I mean, she was born into a very well-to-do family. They were wealthy. She was a member of the intellectual and political elite. Her father was an MP. The great and the good came to the dining table. So she was already inculcated with a sense of her own sense of entitlement and can-do-ness. And here she is, of course, in a more reflective mode after her return from the Crimea, when she was actually quite ill with brucellosis. She's reading, so the intellect and the brains that we have, something that's not always privileged in our discussions about nursing and the media image that we also carry. But she understood that evidence was absolutely critical to mobilizing for change. And she was not only an insatiable consumer and creator of data, as we know from her epidemiological studies of soldiers here, demonstrating that soldiers were dying more from want of good care, want and neglect, than from their battle wounds. So in these two diagrams, she at one stroke created a very dramatic portrait of the problems. She understood first and foremost that politicians and policymakers and managers, of course, who are the key consumers of our evidence, have very short attention spans. She understood that. Thus, she designed the polar diagram that I just showed you there, so that at an instant they could see what the nature of the problem actually was. And Drew Weston and a series of political scientists help us to understand that although the right side of the brain is very tweaky and alert to evidence and rationality, the bigger part that governs decision-making ultimately is the left side of the brain. We have to appeal to the emotions, and Nightingale understood that evidence and data were rhetorical tools. They were tools that could be used to persuade, both to create the argument logically, but secondly, to move emotionally from position A to position B. And that is something that I think we can take some lessons from. It's interesting too to think about what is policy. You know, if we sit down and we did a kind of brainstorm here in this room, we'd all come up with perhaps different definitions. But I quite like just thinking policy, rather than having some kind of a priori view of what it is it actually, it's whatever governments do, it's whatever decisions are taken in your workplace. To some extent, you know, that's policy, whether it complies with the values of the organization. And if you like, the propositions that have been presented is a different kind of matter. But it's what governments do. It is also highly dramatic. We were talking last night over dinner about the commonalities and the synchronicities between actors and nurses. I think there's, you know, we're all performers. You're performing, I'm performing. And when we're delivering care, boy, are we on show. So what Sue was talking about in terms of role modeling behavior, one doctor described leadership as monkey see, monkey do. The most important influence probably on our behavior and the way that we influence others is by role modeling that behavior. Whether it syncs with what we think people want to hear and do and align themselves with, or whether it actually conflicts with the values and creates tensions and contradictions. So policy is, as we know from the newspapers, a highly dramatic theatre of operation. It is the intentions of the authors of the drama. That is what we have got to get into as nurses. We have to understand where those policymakers are coming from. What is the psychology that is going to excite and agitate and mobilize that policymaker and pull them into our sphere of operation, our expertise, where we want them to be, close to us? How are we going to understand where they are and where we want to move them to. Empathy. Now, we should be the empresses of empathy as nurses. We pride ourselves on being advocates. We pride ourselves on being able to step into the shoes of others. So in policy making and understanding that policy game, it is a game. It is a theatre of operation. We also can use our great skills of empathy. We should be the best at this the world has ever known. If we apply our clinical skills to the policy arena, you know, these are not two distinct areas. They're just a mere elaboration and extension of each other. So empathy is the key currency that drives those policy actors. What is going to make them look good? How can we help managers, policymakers, politicians look good? Francis has just given us a wonderful menu of initiatives through which Queensland Health and the government can actually say, hey guys, we're doing amazing things. We're improving the systemic outcomes for our patients, and the intervention is by scaling up the quality and calibre of nursing. That makes a pretty good kind of news story, doesn't it? I think entering into that assumptive world, therefore, of policymakers is what we need to do. We need to understand what makes them tick, and also, this is a kind of artful craft. We have got to be a bit crafty about how we do it. We've got to think tactics. We've got to have a strategy. And Sue's slide, it talked about nurses, the strategic contribution to healthcare. That's also very important. But if we're going to be game changers, we also, by extension, have to be setting the strategy in the first place. We have to be the strategic leaders, right there in the cockpit of government, making the moves, not sitting outside the goldfish bowl whilst others in that theatre of operation are making the moves, and we're just kind of puppets, which is sometimes how we feel. So this point just elaborates what I've been saying, which is that actually the good news is that as clinical leaders, we should be leveraging our expertise, our detailed knowledge of clinical challenges, the experience of the patients, that granular knowledge about the aftercare of patients, about how they're responding to their drugs. That, if you think about the way in which we could conceivably, through social and other media, don't ask me how we do this exactly, but harvest that experience, find a way to orchestrate and organize it. This is a big mining part of the world, isn't it? You know, this is the Gold Coast. We need to think about our knowledge as gold. It is gold. And we've got to be panning strategically for gold through guidelines, making sure every opportunity, the students that were mentioned before, they're keen, they're coming out with enthusiasm and energy. That's the currency we need to work with. But they've also got a lot of knowledge. We can be working with students creatively in the workplace in order to try and leverage and harvest that expertise. When they're asking a question, you think, yeah, actually, I'm not very sure about that, but let's go and find out. What is the latest thinking on the aftercare of patients who have abdominal resections, about what exactly can you eat? Nobody tells you, you know, as you move into the post-operative phase. Okay, so that's a student project. There's a nice little undergraduate or master's thesis in that. Let's use that resource that we've got. And policy, of course, is not just about implementation. I think in nursing, we've often seen ourselves more at the implementation and applied, and we pride ourselves on being applied. But let's get into the formulation stage. What we don't also perhaps recognize, and this is about our, you know, valuing what we already have in the treasure chest, is that knowledge of implementation is absolutely critical to redesigning systems appropriately, so they do the things we do, and we're not always then doing the corrections and kind of after workarounds. So implementation of policymakers should be gagging to have us on board, because we understand how to get things done. And that knowledge often is up here, but it needs to be decanted from here through the hearts and the hands into the heartland of policy making. Those things need to move in synchrony. So the policy portfolio, the way in which the demand for policy, this is the other thing. There's always a kind of rationing business goes on here, because actually the capacity to implement any policy, it's a sort of Darwinian universe, exceeds, the capacity to implement is much less than the supply of policies. So during the last government in the UK, we had initiativeitis. We still do to some extent. You know, it is like a pathology of policymakers. Every time a minister makes a speech, they feel they have to make a new announcement about a new initiative. Nothing is left to bed down to really take root. So you get this kind of archaeology of incrementalism, right? And that means that you're skiting all over the place, essentially. So the capacity to implement policy always is less than the supply of potential initiatives. So then you've got a lot of ricocheting in the system. Which one do you major on? Which is important? Which one gets the energy to be taken forward with that kind of propulsive power? And maybe in amidst the kind of dysphoria and the confusion, that's actually where nurse leadership can come along and say, these are the important priorities. But we do not know what the important priorities are unless we ourselves have a strategy. And that's where your organisation comes in. Helps to use the collective consciousness and unconsciousness of people in this room and beyond the multiplier effect to actually decide what is it we're really going to major on. What is it that we are absolutely brilliant at that nobody else can do as well as we can? So that kind of filtering mechanism happens in terms of the rationing book around policy. Only certain things do make it to the statute book, a tiny number of them, in fact. And also, we've got all these other people, these other stakeholders, governments and policy implementers. They're not, of course, the only game in town. As you see from all of your sponsors today, that's a kind of penumbra of stakeholders, interested bodies, who want to get a piece of the action in the policy space. So there's big pharma, there's the medical profession, there are bodies who are providing technology enablement, businesses, commercial interests, patient voices. All of these are piling into that space, trying to get a minister's ear as well. What's going to give you that advantage over Allocate Software or the patients' advocacy groups? Thinking through that. What is about the story, as Sue was saying? Because here's a poor policymaker, martyr to the cause, like Saint Sebastian, essentially being attacked from every single direction. I pity the policymaker because, frankly, I wouldn't know where to turn. Oh, I think that's a really good idea. Oh, I think that's a really good idea. Gosh, you know what? Yeah, that would really make our government look good. But in fact, they're all great. But I'm not sure we can satisfy everyone. So this is the plight of the policymaker. The power calculation, therefore, is that we leverage our sense of empathy. We get into the heads of policymakers. We understand the space in which they are operating. We make ourselves do it, take the fear factor out of it, and just do it. We engage because we're charming, and we understand we're very political animals as nurses. You have to be, because in everyday clinical care, you're negotiating politically an infinitesimal number of relationships. That is your gold. That, together, understanding those factors, should have a positive output in terms of empowerment. But the evil historical spectre looms large in this, because policy is also quite lazy as a phenomenon. It's very highly determined and driven by what's gone before, precedent. You take policies from the UK, we take policies from you. Oh, why go and invent a new one? You know, it's worked there. This is how policy is made. What often happens in education gets transferred to health. We can see that in a whole series of macro policies. So policy often works by this kind of incremental elaboration and outworking of what's gone before. It's just a bit of tweaking and twirling. And that's an important thing. It's really hard. People say, we want to be radical. We want to tear up the rule book and start from scratch. We have the vanguards at the moment in the UK. And this is about tearing up the rule book. Well, let's just see how easy it is to tear up the rule book and have that sense of freedom. So the kind of complex adaptation game is probably more prevalent than we would like in policymaking. It is about this kind of patching up, you know, and repair work to things that are deemed to be pathological, especially if they are the preserve of the previous government. Oh, that was all terrible. You dismiss and diss the past, and the bright new shiny new, which is going to be the latest incarnation of something, but it is essentially a tweaked and twirled version of what's gone before. However, the crucial thing in getting policy through is that there is a policy window. And if I weren't jet-lagged, I could remember the name of the person, John Kingdom, whose policy window theory, I think, is a very useful kind of mechanism through which to understand. There'll be several policies competing for attention. Against ratios, you'll have several counter-arguments. There's going to be a wonderful study in how do you leverage change, looking back at it in terms of its intrinsic policy analysis. But the windows come along quite rarely when you can move forward. What are you going to do? Someone used the word alignment. I think it was Francis, about things lining up in Queensland. They were out of sync before. They're now coalescing. To get to the statute book, it's a pretty hard call, and it's a rare phenomenon. And several times this has happened in the UK, and that's some of my previous historical work has analysed that. And I ventured that there needs to be 3 sets of conditions satisfied to do this. There needs to be a favourable context, needs to be a convergence between the interests of the profession and the interests of the state. You need to be positioning yourself as a solution to some broader problems. And we're going to talk later on about equity, access and cost, and the way in which nursing has nimbly and niftily positioned itself in that way. And thirdly, leadership, luck. Lady luck has got to be on your side. There are moments when the time is right and you can fly through the policy window. That happened in 1919 with the state registration of nurses, and has happened, I think, with APN and other state legislature around advancing nurse practitioner, the second tier of regulation. Things that need legislation often seem to have to fit those types of conditions. This is a framework, a heuristic I find quite helpful, thinking about, you know, the competitive domain and the dramatic domain of policy. There are interests, there are institutions, and there are ideas. You can have a brilliant idea, an idea about nursing, which is, it is a solution to these policy questions, these problems, and access and quality and cost, that other kind of golden triangle, if you like. That's a really strong idea. Then how do we work it up as a kind of political strategy behind a policy idea? It needs to work through institutions, that's where you come in, and it also needs to be, you know, catalysed by other changes. What are the interests that are working for it? What are the interests that are working against it? So this is a way of thinking about policy. In the centre here, you've got other options that will compete with it. You've got the choices that different actors make, and you've got the actual ways in which you define the problem. One of the great tasks of leadership, I think we've already seen evidence of this, to my mind, most important thing, apart from role modelling behaviour, is taking control of the narrative, you have got to make sure that you take control of the narrative. It's your story about yourself, about nursing, that is getting out there. We spend a lot of time talking about nursing to each other. That's important to, raise the self-esteem of the profession and to buoy us up for support moving forward. But equally, the conversation we need to be having is with the media, is with people who are not in the inner sanctum of our influence, getting beyond that. That's the real test of leadership, whether other people do pay attention to us. I think we've already heard a call to that earlier on. A lot of the little case studies I'm going to talk about briefly now really are about optimizing the nursing contribution to these three elements, what I call the golden triangle. And if we can position nursing as a political strategy in a policy domain in that way, I think we've got an extremely strong story to tell. That is how we control the narrative. That is how we stay front and centre, and we don't get kind of shaken off, pushed off our podium because someone else comes along with a better story. We can fight back. We've got the evidence base on these issues. Here are some of the four little cameos I want to refer to. And some of them have been more successful than others, and I think it gives us pause for reflection as to why that might be. What happened with each of these? Talking first about Clinton reform, which I had the privilege to study when I was a Hartness Fellow. I know Francis has also been a Hartness Fellow working with Linda Aitken at the University of Pennsylvania. So I was studying what the policy issues were. It was interesting. I thought, gosh, we all seem to bang our head against the brick wall in the UK. Here was a moment when it seemed the policy window was about to open with Clinton healthcare reform. And it was the perfect storm because there was a huge problem with the uninsured. Nursing and advanced practice nursing in particular, there'd just been a meta-analysis by the Office for Technology and Health that demonstrated the value of advanced practice as a solution to access, quality and cost issues. The Clintons also themselves, and particularly because they came from Little Rock, knew that rural nurse practitioners, the rural areas of the states were totally under-doctored, and therefore nurses had been filling this space. The other factor that was important was that the ANA, American Nurses Association, backed the Democrats through a political action coalition. They actually supported the campaign of the Democrats, so there was a bit of payback there. But in addition to that, Virginia Trotter Betts, who was then head of the ANA, was also very good friends with Al Gore's wife, because they both had schmoozed at Vanderbilt University. So Tipper Gore and Jenna Betts were like that. These personal relationships are extremely important. So what happened was that, of course, there seemed to be a perfect storm, a coalescing of factors coming together that made it look as if we were just about to fly through that window. There was legislation written, but there were also forces against the initiative. So we had the health insurance of America. We had a campaign by the insurance companies who felt extremely threatened by this particular initiative. There was the American Medical Association, who basically dissed nursing, and the Texan Medical Association put out a lot of propaganda, anti-nurse propaganda, where they had pictures of nurses, of ducks and stethoscopes, and the image of a nurse next to them, which was basically nurses are quacks. They're pretending to be doctors, so it was vicious. You could talk about resilience, I'll tell you. And the American Association of Retired Persons, which is the largest single pressure group in the US, older people. What an opportunity to align your agenda with them. They actually came on board, but it was too late. Unfortunately, the timing was off. So it seemed as if everything was going well. Clinton's mother, as you may know, was also a nurse. That kind of helped a great deal. He understood, what that work involved. But the forces of evil from Harry and Louise, this campaign was extremely successful from the insurance companies against the Clinton health reform. Legislation went on and in and out of the Reform Act, and I'm afraid in the end, for various other reasons, Whitewater, etc., health reform and Hillary went down. She also had her, challenges with her elderly and dying father. These things distract people, and they are the forces that actually can clobber reform. So that didn't happen, but I guess it was a kind of very interesting, nearly opportunity. The next initiative, The Future of Nursing, you may have heard about. Robert Wood Johnson teamed up with the Institute of Medicine, very highly prestigious body, National Academy of Sciences, it's now known as. A continuity with the Clinton, with Donna Shalala, also, who was Secretary of State for Health with Clinton, was also brought in to help spearhead and chair that committee. Very shrewd move. She's a highly regarded individual, and she's not going to take any pushback from colleagues, hostile forces, let's say. So Donna Shalala, also a politico who has, friends in high places. And these, again, were the areas that were majored on. There's a script already written around leadership, what nurses could contribute there, expanding scope of practice throughout the states, doing a scoping exercise, first of all, to say that a nurse practitioner is not a nurse practitioner who can do the same things with prescribing rights and all the rest of the malarkey in different states. It was hugely variable. Why is that? There need to be something done to actually re-regulate those areas. We are not optimizing what we can do. Education, pushing up the numbers vastly, the concentration of graduates in the workforce, enablement, capability building, absolutely essential. Similarly, with PhDs, PhD prepared, doctorally prepared, a huge spike in the numbers of doctorates of nursing practice. Interprofessional collaboration, where is that happening? At the curriculum, in the universities. That was another metric which they designed. And extending the diversity so it's much more representative of the population that is being treated, and drawing on the talent base as well. So those were the 5 areas. They also, unlike with the Clinton Reform Act itself, what failed to become an act, but which was a campaign essentially, they also had the resources through Robert Wood Johnson to develop a political strategy. So they built coalitions, which gave the whole campaign enduring energy and longevity. They created these different champions with these different organizations. They rolled them out in a strategic way across different states, so it was an incremental, highly targeted campaign. They sweetened the pill with resources, with money to secure a campaigning agenda. They garnered other donors through fundraising, and they created this kind of very clear roadmap. So this was a very crystalline, transparent political strategy that was attached to a nursing reform effort. Engage media and collect stories. Very, very important. I think the other factor that was important here was creating this dashboard. They had metrics. We've heard about the scorecard in Queensland. They had metrics by which they could measure their performance, and they dipsticked into those metrics over time. That is where we are now. There's an evaluation that is going to be published in January. It'll be very interesting to see where that is. But that reform effort has not been government sponsored, but that has actually got a lot of traction. And we see those metrics improve over time because of the sophistication of the political strategy and the prestige partners that are, and the political will that sits behind it. 2 further case studies from the UK. One is the Frontline Care Prime Minister's Commission on the Future of Nursing Midwifery, in which I had the privilege to serve under the last government, and the Productive Ward. So I'm just going to spin through these because I'm concerned about my time. Am I okay? Okay, brilliant, thank you. So this is Frontline Care. This was very, very interesting because the timing of this is it was a compressed piece of work because it actually happened not under Tony Blair but under Gordon Brown, who was very sympathetic towards nursing. Possibly, perhaps, because one of his junior ministers of health was also a nurse, and she was able, I think, she'd been his parliamentary under-secretary. They'd been friends over a long period of time, trusted colleagues, and she'd obviously lobbied hard to try and get this into a position of prominence on the agenda. Of course, Sarah Brown understood midwifery very well, and both Gordon too, from their own tragic experience of having the premature death of their firstborn, Jennifer. So there was a kind of emotional attachment, but also Sarah had had quite a lot to do with the Royal College of Midwives and Millennium Goals through WHO, had really become a champion. So they were somewhat familiar with this kind of territory. There were 20 of us all together. Anne Keane was the minister at the time who was chairing and spearheading this initiative. It followed a predictable pattern of commissions on nursing and midwifery. There's never been anything like this before. It was the first time a Prime Minister had actually sponsored and supported such an initiative. So, of course, we went out and talked to lots of people, had listening in consultative exercises and focus groups to find out what people thought good looked like in nursing. What did they want? What was this value proposition that Sue referred to earlier? What is it that they wanted? And we got lots of evidence back. These are some of the kinds of themes that we developed. One was around high quality and compassionate care. How do we actually deliver high quality, compassionate care? Creating a kind of pledge was one of the more controversial ideas in the report, and that probably created more kind of twittering than many other things. The twittering from the twittering classes. It was an idea which was really about trying to, I think, help nurses recommit to the profession and understand what that essential values-driven mission that we have. I don't use mission lightly. I mean mission in the sense of the thing that we are sent to do, not in any divine calling, Nightingale kind of way, but actually that what is our mandate, and to remind ourselves what that actually is, because in the hurly-burly of everyday life, it's very easy to lose sight of that. The nurse managers that Sue referred to earlier on, taking a pledge and just reminding yourself of a recommitment to your profession, and even perhaps doing that publicly. We have swearing-in ceremonies for citizenship where you actually sign up to loyalty to your country. There are certain responsibilities come with that. This was meant to be articulated and advocated in concert with the professional code. So it was something about a reminder of what are we for, this core purpose that was referred to in Sue's TED film, the TED Talk. What was at the core of that? Why are we here? What are we here to do? And what is our purpose? So that was that. And actually, when I was head of school, I got our students to write a pledge, which now is part of, they love it. I have to say, students miss feeling a sense of, yes, total commitment. They want to feel that they are fully emotionally engaged with what they're doing. And so they wrote the pledge in every graduation. That is what we say. That is what we celebrate. And I think it does speak to that a kind of yearning and a longing for a clear sense of positionality in our own moral compass. I think there is a real appetite for that. We can talk about that later. So, some of this will be familiar to you as well. It's not just about the individual being responsible for care. It's also about developing from the ward to the board that we've already heard about a care line of governance that makes it clear that there is this arterial line running from the front line to the board, and that the board is fully cognizant and signed up and understanding that that voice is actually heard at the board of what the quality of care issues actually are. So it was about engagement in governance arrangements that enables the nursing voice to speak with and to the board and be fully representative of and represented at the board. Protecting the title nurse, because as you know, there's been many other care workers claiming the caring space. So that was about trying to clear some of the thicket that had grown around the title of the nurse. Regulating advanced practice, we're not there yet. That still seems in the deep and distant future. Why? It honestly defeats me. I do not understand why that is so difficult to set standards and to have a long-term career pathway that has educational enablement and investment at every point of progression. That's logic. That's a logic model that holds in medicine, for example, but we need to take that little template and pop it on nursing. And that would ensure that we have a stable career pathway and that people are not kind of, getting thrown off course and left to the lottery of investment by employers in CPD. No, it's postgraduate education. We are a graduate profession. CPD is part of it, but let's call it postgraduate and make sure that it is truly incremental postgraduate credit accumulation, leading to something, not some crazy cul-de-sac. So, regulating support workers, we can't clear away this thicket of all those who are piling into the caring space unless we have some clarity about the training and the regulation of support workers. The engagement as well in service design, as we heard, nurses and midwives being involved in, as they are through the productive ward, in designing care models and creating that evidence base. So participation in that was highly valued. A named midwife, looking after ourselves. The Borum report had just come out and showed that health professions, and particularly nursing, were not being well catered for, and there was worrying levels of ill health in our profession and unhealthy behaviours. And so that mandate, that responsibility also is one that should be carried by employers. This is where we can max out. Caring for people with long-term conditions, we really understand how to do that well because we are the care navigators, as was described, and understand, again, the day-to-day, the everyday experience of what it's like to cope with a long-term condition and that kind of disruption that it causes to your life and the implications for carers. Flexible roles and career structures, I think that will be familiar to you. Promoting innovation, like we've said, I think it was Frances was talking about, you don't have to have demonstrated that you have, all the credentials under the sun before you get promoted. Fast track young leaders to work with seasoned practitioners as well. Start budding people up. This is how we will get radical innovation. Keep these people inoculated against, the toxicity of the system as well. Keep them keen and work with their ideas. They are going to be brilliant. And I wanted to implement a scheme called Nurse First, which was about taking people who were graduates in other areas and get some traction on their transferable skills, who obviously trained as nurses, but to get them and create fellowships so that people could move forward in a progressive way. E-health, making better use of technologies. This is going to have upsides, it's going to have downsides, it's going to have unintended consequences, but let's use it for remote care of the elderly. There's a group in the Netherlands and in Sweden, I think, called Buurtzorg, which is self-organising teams, e-enabled, coaching, no managers. They're an amazingly high-performing set of nurses. It's a business that's grown like Topsy. They are the tops and deliver all quality and cost and experiential measures. They are extremely successful in this, and it's a nurse inaugurated organisation. So that technology is being used to great effect in those care models. Leading services, I'm not going to dwell on these, but the fast tracking systems and schemes, that's got to happen, but there needs to be support in the system to do that. Opening and closing the policy windows I mentioned. Okay, we were lucky we had a broad consensus on the problems. We had a shared sense of solution, and there was general agreement with, I think, the body politic in nursing and beyond. I mean, the Royal Colleges, medical colleges as well. But sadly, this initiative came at the tail end of a government which was beginning to run out of political support and steam and finally lost the election. So we weren't in a position to implement any of these. The big, of course, downer was the change of government. But, so that change stalled. But again, you can see how dependent it is on what's gone before. And what we tend to do in nursing is every time we have a new reform initiative, this is where this path dependency comes in. We go back to the very beginning and we start tinkering with pre-education. How can we kind of invent the graduate nurse with all these different new skills that they need to have to change the system without really moving forward? So it's like setting the cursor, going back to zero. That's what we've got to avoid in moving forward. The productive ward that some of you may have heard of has been very successful frontline implementation of change. It's really empowered nurses. It's given them their voice to free up time to care and decide what's the wheat and what's the chaff of care. Where do they want to focus their energies? What do they want to max out on and prioritise? It was actually created by our National Institute for Innovation, which in its previous incarnation had yet a different name. This is another thing. All these bodies, these quangos, the bonfire of the quangos. We're in our third generation of body for innovation. It's absolutely crazy. But it did this body, whose name just escapes me, created these modules. It's really about lean and efficient techniques being applied to healthcare. There was a lot of buy-in and traction from managers to try, and as we'd known from research studies, nurses being distracted or diverted in their time towards often compensating for the deficits of other workers, doing clerical work, doing work that's not considered to be nursing or adding value to patient care. How can you essentially organise that so that that is done, but actually you've got the proper infrastructure of support in place to enable nurses to nurse? I mean, this is why we came into the job, not to be, souped up housekeepers. So there are several kind of iterations of the productive ward in different areas. It had a lot of traction because it was supported financially by the government. Again, it was incentivised. People went on training courses. It's a bit like Magnet, you felt that same kind of energy because it's doing its purpose and its overall objectives are quite similar to Magnet. You're creating these metrics and you're also galvanizing people to do what they love and they feel very passionate about. It's about increasing the proportion of time spent on patient care and making, you're designing your environment. This is very Nightingale oriented, the control of the nurse environment. That's what leadership is partly about. So it developed in 2005. It's going to be evaluated. What's the sustainability? What's the longevity of any of these developments? And it had a very rapid uptake, as you can see here, from the initial evaluations. And that leadership was really driven by frontline nurses and matrons who had a whale of a time with it. Really, it was quite a charismatic movement, in sociological terms. Again, it was highly adaptable to different types of environments. It really made nurses feel empowered. It gave them a script to talk to the board as well, and a real feel-good factor. It also was very disciplined in how it approached metrics. These are some of the data that were collected to demonstrate its intrinsic value, so across several different domains. I just want to speak very briefly, finally, as part of a reflection on the use of evidence, which is an important part of any of these innovation implementation exercises. And they are in forecast work itself across Europe, that actually this was a very, very large-scale study, again building on models and methodologies that have been tried and tested in the US, but not in Europe, and the naysayers saying, that's all very well for America, but it's, it's NIMBYism, it's not going to work in our backyard, thank you very much, you can keep your American ideas. But we managed to harness the evidence and publish a paper last year in the Lancet, which was one of the top 3 cited papers in the Lancet last year, which is absolutely fantastic. But it demonstrated through killer facts, again, it's how you communicate these things, the value of better educated nurses and what you can deliver by modelling some of these findings in terms of investing in the improvement and the enhancement of nurse capability through education. That yields dividends. That is an investment that has benefits, clear, tangible benefits for patient care. And that has influenced the NICE guidance on safe staffing. Our pathway's been a bit different from out here in Queensland, but that's something, at least it got that on the agenda and has made a major contribution, I think, to that field. It also impacted a debate about where nursing, how many years post of education a nurse needed to have before they could enter a nursing programme in Europe, making it, I don't want to go into too much detail, but essentially the revision of the directive which makes it possible for us to have harmonised qualifications across Europe and therefore mobility across Europe, was under threat from basically the German constituency, who wanted to cut nursing education back to 10 years. So age 16, for example, a nurse you could enter a nursing college, because nursing was located in technical colleges in Germany. And to pull nursing out of those would actually ruin, they felt, the infrastructure of technical educational sector. So it was very controversial, and it was a German that was dragging on this and changing the directive from 12 to 10 years. Very perilous and dangerous, because it would impact on the whole of nursing in Europe. It would in effect make it possible for governments to say we're no longer going to have nursing in universities. So our evidence has been helpful in trying to, stabilise that change and stop it from actually pulling back to 10 years. Just a final slide here. This is a slide which I think we need to do more work on from our end forecast. Basically, it asks nurses, probably the largest study that's been done of its kind in nursing from different countries. This is about your opportunity to participate in policy making. As you can see, the glass is definitely half or even less empty. So there's a way to go before nurses feel they are engaged to their fullest capacity in the policy-making enterprise and decision-making. That is a profound waste of talent, because we have that talent and we need to be able to find a forum to express it. So that is an amazing deficit that needs to be developed in terms of the human capacity for leadership overall. So what I've demonstrated, I hope, is that there are different ways of mobilising change, policy change. Nursing is very much an evidence-based solution to the problems of healthcare. We are trusted by the public. We know we're one of the most trusted professions. That gives us an important level of authority and voice to speak with and on behalf of the public. Our clinical expertise is our entree into decision-making for us. Let's treasure that. Let's have appreciative inquiry of that. I think we really need internships and more policy-savvy nurses. Let's get in there to understand public policy. Let's have fellowships, Robert, from foundations, wherever we can, that build on those experiences. And from that, we need to amplify the nursing voice. We need to pump up the volume. Thank you very much for listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Rafferty. Thank you, Professor. Look, I'll leave that there for just a moment.
Am I getting a
Look, thank you. Look, your questions are, I know we're under the whip here, and I do have another speaker, but I will do the most important question because it's up the top, and it seems to be from quite a number of people. And I know the answer is going to have to be short as well, and you may not be able to do that. But what can nursing in Australia learn from the experiences of the UK? In 30 seconds.
Okay. So I think that there's obviously no one-way traffic in this. I think we've got a lot to learn from each other. I think I'm looking forward to hearing what Rosemary's got to say about higher education and that particular tale, because I don't think essentially we can take anything that we've already gained for granted. I think supervigilance on our part and see the storm clouds gathering around us. I think we need to look at what's happening in terms of the experiments. I think it's, at the moment, in ratios. In Australia, we're looking for inspiration. We have a different approach. I think we can learn from each other. I think you've got advanced practice, more advanced than we do. I think that would be a very positive learning metric. And I think research evidence, our funding base, I understand from discussions with Christine and others, is more generous than yours is. I think you need to lobby. At one point, I headed up a think tank on research policy. We did actually get change. I think you need to lobby for expanding the nursing voice in research funding, because that gives you the ammunition, the research evidence with which to have those arguments to get the entrees into the decision-making process. So it's a complex intervention, Scott, and it needs all hands on deck. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, collaboration.